Welcome to the X Factor. I'm your host, Charles Epstein. Today I'm speaking with Eric Sydell, co-founder and CEO of Vero AI, a firm dedicated to helping companies understand AI and other algorithmic solutions. Eric is an experienced consultant, R&D leader, and an entrepreneur in the staffing and recruiting industry. He is also a Ph.D. focused in industrial organizational psychology. So from IO to AI, very, very, very interesting. I'm going to have to ask Eric about that a little bit. Eric, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Charles. It's great to be here.
But the question I need to ask you first, because I see what others don't, because they're only hearing this, but I see guitars in the frame, and I know that not only do you play guitars, I've had people on who've played guitars at various levels, but you actually make them.
Yes, that is right. I make them badly and infrequently, but one day I would like to get better at this and progress my skills. So it's a nice hobby for sure. I've been interested in playing music and learning guitar for a long, long time, and then more recently got interested in making things out of wood and metal, and that led me to guitar construction. And I learned quickly that I thought I had a lot of technical expertise in my work, but that is a whole nother ball game of uh, artistry and technical skill that is involved in making a playable instrument. And it is really just something that, you'd think, oh, you can watch a couple YouTube videos on this and figure it out, and that is not the case.
What did you have to get better at?
What do you have to get better at? The very, very minute tolerances and angles and precision that's involved in making an instrument that sounds and plays well. And especially when you look at like an acoustic guitar, those are a lot harder to make than electric guitars, generally speaking, I would say. A very particular thickness of wood, a very particular type of wood, a very particular way you put it together and brace it, and the neck being attached to the body has to be at a precise angle, a very precise angle. The frets, each fret has to be a exact distance from the fret before it. It's very, very precise. And any of that stuff is wrong, and it's going to be a garbage instrument to play. And so, I think my plan to get good at this is to probably make 20 instruments and throw them away to get to one that's where I start to have the right skill. You can also go to school for this. Luthery school, and go and train at the foot of a master for a while. And that's really the way to do it. Because when you,
Where would you go? Is there a place in the States? Is there a place abroad? Place in Europe,
yeah,
Spain? Where would you go?
everywhere. There's places everywhere. And for a while, I've been wanting to go visit this guy that I know who makes hand-carved archtop guitars. And so these are like jazz guitars with F holes in them, for the sound and things. And so there's a whole that's like the highest art, I think, in guitar making is to hand carve a top that's not flat, right? It's not flat, it's got a curve to it. So you carve it with your hand all to the precise thickness, and then you take the piece of wood and you tap it, and you listen for the resonance. And then where you find dead spots, you carve a little bit more off. And so it's this whole process that involves being able to touch and feel and carve and hear, the resonance that's coming out of this random piece of wood, and every piece of wood is different. So it's this whole thing. Like you can't just read a how-to article on this and have a prayer of being able to do a good job of it. It's a
Yeah.
true deep dive, years study type of thing to be able to do this thing.
Do you have to have a particularly good ear, or are there objective ways to measure if, sound quality, sound
Or
distortion, all that kind of stuff?
you have objective ways to measure that stuff, but I think most of the really highly skilled luthiers that make these types of, archtop instruments, they've developed the ear over decades and
For sure.
decades doing this. And so, there's an art. It's an art for sure.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you one question before we move on, because we could just have a conversation about this. I find this so incredibly fascinating. And we already have had a couple of conversations. Have you produced anything that's actually playable?
Well, yeah. I mean, this guitar behind me, you can see a little bit of there. That's just they call that a parts caster. So you can take and buy parts and make a Stratocaster or Telecaster type guitar pretty easily. So that doesn't require a ton of skill. So that thing is playable. I made ukuleles. I've never made a very playable acoustic yet. I've trashed a bunch of acoustic designs that I've made though. So I'm.
Well, with kits, by the way, I know you're, moving up the DIY chain, and as you said, getting starting from the wood. Now, these kits. This is the last question. I'm going to ask about this. I promise. Um, Now, are these kits sort of third party aftermarket kits, or are they put out by Gibson and the guitar makers themselves?
They're mostly third party stuff. Fender does license their neck designs, I think, to others to allow them to, create necks that are of their, dimensions and shape and everything. I don't know if Gibson does that. I think they're pretty proprietary.
The last thing I'm gonna have to name drop is I'm somewhat friendly with one of the Zildjians,
Oh.
company that makes strings. So that's my claim to fame. I figured I'm not going to have another podcast. We're going to be able to drop that name. Anyway, Eric, I really do appreciate your spending the time with me today. Really do appreciate it. And the other question that I want to ask you, that I started by sort of alluded to in our intro, your career trajectory. How did you go from IO psychology to being the CEO of Vero AI, as I said, from IO to AI? How did that happen?
Yeah, it's been a long journey, Charles. Uh, right. I can't imagine like being in college and being like, I think this is what I want to do. Like this stuff that we're doing now wasn't even invented when I was in college or grad school, so that would have been a hard trajectory to
Yes.
but from an early age, and I talk about this a lot, but I have a book on my desk here that's Carl Sagan's The Demon Haunted World: Science as a Candle in the Dark. And this book was written in 1996. I got it as a gift on my birthday, December 20th, 1996. And he talks about in that book how the scientific method is such a great contribution to the world and how we can use it to uncover information and insights about the world around us. And that's how we fight disinformation and pseudoscience and things like that. And that's how we grow and progress cumulative knowledge in the world. And I thought, I want to contribute to that. That's what I want to do. And I remember that I got it on that day because December 20th, 1996 was my 23rd birthday, and it was also the day that Carl Sagan died of complications from cancer. So that's always stuck with me. And to this day, I have this book right beside me. So to me, like I was always fascinated by information out in the world and what we do with it, how we think about it as humans, how we use it to move forward in our lives and our workplace. How can we make ourselves better? How can we make our companies better? How can we make the world better? And so that progressed and led me into industrial psych, which is a lot of statistics
Sure.
and studying data. It's a social science. So you learn the scientific method and you learn how to create hypotheses and test them, and in order to test them, you have to learn statistics. So I learned all that stuff. And then for 20 years, I worked in HR technology as a co-founder of a company called Shaker Consulting Group, which then became Modern Hire. And then in 2023, that was bought by HireVue.
Uh,
When I approximately left around that time. And at that point, I wanted to do something, different for a change. And I wanted to create something that could help understand information in the world around us. Sort of like, you could think of like a business intelligence solution, like a business, a dashboard of some sort, a Power BI or a Tableau or a Visio, like companies like that, or a one model. Like I wanted to be able to create some sort of platform and system to understand information. But the key difference was this was also around the time that generative AI came on the scene. And we recognized right from the start that generative AI gives us a way to study non-numerical information at scale. So, you know, all the business intelligence solutions that are out there revolve around quantitative numeric data. You're taking a spreadsheet and then you're showing a chart or a graph or pie chart or whatever the case may be, right? That sort of explains that numeric data. But here's the thing, only 20% of the information in the world is numeric. The other 80% is unstructured.
Right.
It's text, it's video, it's images, web pages, PDF documents, Word, all these types of things, right? And so there's no good way to make sense of that and to study it and to pull insights from it at scale. And what we realized is that actually generative AI and large language models give us a path to do this. And so that was really the origins of Vero AI. We did not realize in the very beginning that compliance was going to be our natural kind of first market. And so we had to come to that realization after we got started and realized that, hey, what we've built here is actually super applicable for this compliance or governance risk compliance. They call it GRC space. And so that's where we've really just, focused in the last year and a half or so, from building out what we're creating. But, essentially, what we're doing is we're taking information of all types and we're using generative AI and other machine learning to essentially translate it into numbers. So we're, in a way, you can think about what we're doing is taking qualitative data and making it quantitative. And now instead of just 20% of the world being quantitative, it's all quantitative. And once it's a
I see.
number, you can study it. You can study.
Okay. So essentially tokenizing the
That's right.
information, and so you could put it into these systems, and as you say, make sense of it. I could go a little bit deeper into what Vero does, how it works, the breadth of systems and data it audits.
Yeah, for sure. So, um, if
So
you,
let me take a step back. Let me ask you a question. And this sort of occurred to me after we had our first conversation. So I do want to get into this. I'm sorry. But so you're using an AI tool to audit other AI driven tools. Is that a fair description of some of what you're doing?
well, that is a fair description of some of what we are doing, yes. But and we did start thinking that our main role would be to audit AI. And we had this original desire to sort of help the world harness and make sense of AI technologies. But at the same time, we realized that the engine we built can be used not just for harnessing and evaluating AI, but evaluating any sort of framework, compliance framework
Right,
that.
which I do want to get into. I just want to establish that one particular slice to ask this one particular question, and I don't mean to sound snarky, but you're using AI, which is, as we know, subject to bias to analyze and audit a body of information or processes that are also subject to bias. So it almost sounds like an epistemological problem, almost like a turtles all the way down problem. At what point, do you settle on some objective truth?
Yeah. So, I say this that we're using AI to harness AI like in a little bit of a cheeky way because, it's more nuanced and complicated than that, of course. So there's a lot of different types of AI, for one thing, and everybody just calls everything AI these days anyway.
Sure.
Um, but so, to me, AI is an investigative statistical type of technology. I mean, now we think of it as generative, and it's creative and all this stuff. Well, yeah, but fundamentally, AI, deep learning, machine learning algorithms, and even large language models can be used to parse and investigate information sets. And so to me, it's statistics, and
Right.
tech, that's not a great definition of it, but to me, that's basically how I view it. And so what we're doing is we're applying certain types of AI, including some large language model stuff, to understanding large bodies of information. And that can be AI itself, other AI processes and documentation and methods and things like that, or it can be stuff that's not AI. So that's what I mean when I say like we're using AI to harness, and AI is just statistics. It's very powerful statistics. And so, yes, we are using statistics to understand the world of information around us, which can include
Right.
AI.
Okay. Now, I just wanted to ask that before we get too downstream, just sort of a fun, it almost, again, I don't want to seem myself cheeky, but it seems a little bit, if you just look at it from a little bit of a distance, a bit of a tautology, but I take your point. So back to the original question before I interrupted myself. How Vero works and its broad applications.
Yeah, so essentially, one thing to keep in mind as before I describe this is what is basic generative AI and how is it used? So most people are familiar with it as a prompt box, right? It's ChatGPT prompt or Perplexity or Claude or one of the other ones, Copilot, that people use. And so you ask it a question and it draws on its body of knowledge to answer it. And that is powered by large language models below the surface that you can't see. So what we've done is we are working with the large language models as a fundamental part of our process. There is no prompt box with our process. And instead, what we do is we have a secure, private storage facility. It's what would be called a RAG, a retrieval augmented generative um, framework. And that allows us to ingest or to, upload information into this bucket, and it's private. The companies that build the LLMs don't train their data, their models rather, on that data. So that's a good thing from a security perspective. So we have all this information from a client, and then we've built this analytics engine that basically searches and parses out all that information and figures out what it means, and then relates it to a framework, a compliance framework, or any set of questions or criteria that you might want to upload. So again, there's no prompt. You're not asking it questions. The prompt is replaced by the criteria that you want to know about. And so the key application in the compliance domain would be something like this. So ISO 27001 is a compliance framework that a lot of companies have to comply with. It's a whole bunch of factors they call controls that have to be evaluated to see whether you are in alignment with them or not. And it involves reviewing tons of documentation, different files, could be web pages, could be all sorts of corporate documentation. So the auditor's job is to read through everything probably a bunch of times and figure out where all the answers to all these different questions are and make these determinations. It's a complex thing. It takes a long time to do.
Mhm.
And so our system can essentially do that in an automated way. And for the first control, it'll say something like, we've found that you are likely in compliance with this, and here's why. And it'll spit out all the evidence. So there's no black box. You can see the reasoning of the tool. And that's very important because as we know, LLMs they can hallucinate and do things like that. So you've got to make sure that it actually is you've got to be able to see the reasoning, right? And then for another one, it might say, well, we don't have enough information to evaluate this one. We need you to find, A, B, and C pieces of information. For the next one, it might say, not in compliance. We don't think this is in compliance, and here's why. And so it'll do this, and effectively it'll, save half, roughly of an auditor's time and condense everything down into a nice, neat little summary that you can then progress very easily as a human. So, I want to be clear, this does not do the compliance evaluation itself. It supports the human in making that determination. And the actual act of determining it has to be a human act at this point in time. AI is not good enough to do that on its own. But I mean, these audits take hundreds and hundreds of hours, many of them do. Uh,
Sure.
and then you can get into more and more complex frameworks and standards, like on the financial side of things, you have things like Sarbanes-Oxley, very complicated, involves all kinds of analysis and review,
Yes.
takes tons of time. Big companies spend millions and millions of dollars complying with that every single year. And this is so ripe for automation and not complete automation, but augmentation of what the human auditor does.
Yeah, I think some tools ought to have the option or get into the habit of having sort of a warning label or a nutrition label that either no or very few humans were fired due to this technology or were abused using this technology. So what you're saying is that it's a tool. We talk about AI augmented work. And I
Mm.
would think that that sort of fits in there. This is something that still you need a human being, but it's a tool because clearly this stuff you have to wade through Sarbanes-Oxley. It's just a massive amount of brute force work.
Yeah.
And this is just generally speaking, a perfect use case for this technology or AI generally in a way.
For sure. And there is, there are so many compliance frameworks. There are so many things that companies need to comply with. And most companies really struggle with that. And even the firms, the audit firms that do this type of work, struggle to do it in a timely
Right.
fashion and struggle to hire auditors to do it because it's hard work, it's grueling
Sure.
work, constantly be reviewing this technical documentation. So, what we've found is, we aren't really in a situation here where we're, automating jobs away. What
Right.
we are doing is helping this work to be done much, much faster, much, much cheaper. And auditors like it because it's actually helping them, get through their work faster and allow them to accomplish more with less drudgery and less, paging through all sorts of different documentation and things like that. You put everything in one place, makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, to what extent is Vero being used to audit AI to make sure it's not biased, it's transparent, it's responsible?
Yeah, we are still early, I think, in that market developing. The compliance market as a whole, we're not early in at all. I mean, that market is very mature and has strong, strong need for this type of capability. I think that AI auditing and AI, harnessing is still early because there's not a lot of legislation that has been really, ratified at this point, and companies don't. Most of them don't feel a huge impetus yet. Now, there are standards like ISO 42001 is a new AI related standard from the ISO organization, and that one is getting more and more popular. And I think that's very good. There are other standards that are well known, like the EU AI Act, which includes different levels of AI risk, and that's important to understand. But in the United States, there's no effective, real, federal legislation at this point on AI, and we don't expect there to be any. We do expect to see increasing state level regulation. Even cities, even various cities have, different pieces of regulation that have been put in place. So some are better than others. Some of them don't make that much sense. I mean, I'm in favor of regulating this technology, but at the same time, a lot of the stuff that we've seen so far is, kind of minor and doesn't make that much of a difference, or it's worded in ways that don't help that much. So I think the whole AI harnessing idea is evolving, and we expect it to continue to evolve for some time. And so, what we can do to help companies with this is like we can take a process, a documented process, and evaluate it on where it stands on existing and even future emerging legislation. So if you think about a company that wants to deploy some sort of AI process, but they're not
Right.
sure
It's
if
almost like a sandbox.
yeah, if they're not sure if it's legal or will be legal in the future, what are they supposed to?
Right.
So they feel a lot of companies hesitate to adopt AI technology because they're not sure how the regulatory environment is going to evolve. Well, especially globally, it's very complex, right? But actually, we can take a process and ingest the documentation about it and then use, instead of a compliance framework, we can actually model in current and future emerging legislation and tell somebody globally, this is where you stand on all of this current and future likely legislation to give them the ability to reduce their risk and to increase their certainty that their process
Right.
is
What,
workable.
what do you say to the argument that, companies really don't have the luxury of sort of taking a wait and see attitude as far as AI? If you're going to be real slow in having any kind of policy because people are not going to have access to the tools that everybody knows other people are using, so they're just going to be using them in a stealthy way that's ungovernable, unmonitorable, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that forward-looking companies, companies that are interested in growth and in maintaining their position every company has to be taking a serious look at what AI can do, because it is so disruptive and so powerful. And there are so many use cases of it that can dramatically change what every single company on earth does. And so if you're using AI technology in a way that is open and transparent and not harmful to an individual, to individual workers, to individual humans, then I think in a large way you're future proofed and you should proceed with working on that. That doesn't mean you shouldn't also be mindful of legislation and future legislation, but I feel like if you're doing it in a humane way, if you're using technology in a humane way to support workers, not just um, try to wring more productivity from a workforce, that's where you start to run into, unethical uses and things that effectively dehumanize us as humans and as a workforce. And those are the things that I like to, speak out against to the extent possible. So, I mean, AI is very powerful, and a lot of companies are scared and don't understand it. Well, you need to get over that, and you need to investigate it and figure it out because it's the most disruptive thing we've ever seen in our lives.
Yeah, agreed. Well stated. Eric, on the site, it refers to holistic violet impact model. What exactly is that?
So the Violet Impact Model is something that we created early on as our own framework to help companies and individuals think about what matters in an AI implementation. So a lot of people are saying, oh, we need to use AI, but what is good AI? What's bad AI? What does a good implementation of AI look like? How should we think about that? And so, typically, if you look at existing legislation, for example, in the hiring space, let's talk about that. In hiring, you need to hire people in a way that's not biased against protected classes and that doesn't invade data privacy. Those are the two of the main considerations to be compliant in hiring. Um, but just doing that doesn't necessarily mean you have a good hiring process. You can flip a coin and decide who to hire, and you're basically in compliance with legislation, right? But you don't have a good process. So clearly, it's more than just being compliant is what's important. And so Violet is meant to be a broader framework that helps people understand and think about what is important when we talk about an AI implementation. And so, the L, I'll go out of order. The L is legislative preparedness. So that's where we get into the stuff we've been talking about it. Is it legal right now, and is it likely to be legal down the road as new legislation comes online? So we can score that. We can score all these letters automatically, by the way. So the L, and then you've got the V is for visibility, and that is indicates whether a person understands, whether people are able to see and understand the AI and its effect. That's important because if you don't know it's there, you can't question it. The I is integrity, which speaks to fairness, and that's group differences and things of that nature. They're very important. The O is optimization, meaning are there better ways to develop it and deploy it? Violet E and the E. Okay, the E, I gotta spell it out. I think one of the most important ones is the E. The E is effectiveness. And that is the thing that is often overlooked. So, the coin flip, right? You flip a coin, decide who to hire, you're fine from a compliance framework, from a compliance standpoint, but it's useless. It's clearly useless. It has no effectiveness. And so you have to look at that with any sort of AI tool. What's it actually doing? Is it actually doing what it would purport to do? And then the T, which is transparency, has to do with understanding how the tool itself works and
Right.
working. So all those are important factors. Only one or two of them really have to do with compliance on legislative standards. So, what we try to do is paint a broader picture of how to use these tools. And ultimately, I'm a psychologist. My whole team is psychologists. We are not interested in, using technology to dehumanize the workforce and to make everybody's working lives harder. And there are plenty of implementations of AI that are designed to do exactly that. And so we would like to support AI implementations that are helpful, for humans. Otherwise, look, I mean, otherwise, what are we trying to do here? Just build a world where everybody is subservient to some sort of machine. I mean, so that's not the type of thing we particularly want to support. Um, so yeah, so hence the creation of the Violet model.
Doge is not exactly your view of the optimal future.
I'm gonna try to avoid politics, but
I know, I know, I know, I know.
might surmise that is correct. Yes.
Yeah, ruthless efficiency is, I think, the pleasant euphemism for it.
And there are
Um,
that are, there's a company that recently got a big VC investment that is factory surveillance software that's designed to identify workers on the factory floor who are not being very productive. And then you can yell at them and ask them why they're not being productive. And then when they say, oh, I sprained my ankle, you can say, yeah, but you haven't been productive for the last month. What are you
right,
doing? And then you can
right,
fight,
right.
because they're
No,
pumping
no,
up.
you're right. There is that sort of panopticon uh, potential for
Yeah.
this technology, which is worrying. And I kind of want to get back to that point in a second because you mentioned that compliance was sort of the first application, but it appears you have several others. I want to get to that to the extent that you can talk about what's in the
Yeah.
works. But speaking of what's in the works, what is ahead in the world of AI compliance? We raised a couple of things here. Like I brought up the idea of shadow AI. You mentioned several things that are here. One, of course, is the lack of established standards. Legislation still hasn't really coalesced. What else? What else should we be mindful of?
When I think about this, we of course are in a sort of deregulatory environment right now where it doesn't seem likely that there's going to be any sort of massive new regulation on how to use or not use AI in the United States. And I guess the way I feel about that is that's a shame. But at the same time, we want to promote uses of AI that are good for humanity, that are good for companies, and that make sense, and that are likely to be basically future proof. Because I think that if you're doing it in the right way today, that's going to benefit your company. It's going to make your company more effective. It's going to help your workers to be more effective and to be more satisfied in their jobs. And you're not going to have to worry if some new legislation does come online down the road, you'll be on the right side of history and you won't really have to worry about it. So, I think that's my advice for companies and how I think about AI right now is like we and others can help you implement it in a way that is ethical and that is fair and that is good for your company and good for workers and good for society. And if you do those things now, you're not really likely to have a lot of problems from a regulatory perspective down the road. So to me, the federal government isn't doing much fine. I mean, people, humans, still want to live in a world that is hospitable to them and that is, they want to have good working lives. And there's a lot of things in AI and other automation technology that can actually help and support that. And so that's what we're trying to do. And I mean, that's our mentality right now is to help people do that.
Well, thank you, Eric, for lowering our collective pulse rates on this topic. It tends to get people very, very anxious.
We can do
Um,
thing I would
I
say is,
mentioned, yeah, I'm sorry.
well, I can raise the pulse rates too if you want. I mean, because we can
I
talk
know
about
you can. I know
even
you can.
down the road as this technology develops, then I think the further we go out, the more we are talking about the reduction in jobs and all that sort of thing. And so that's a super important topic as well. It's not something we're, directly addressing right now, but we have plenty of, thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, yeah, no, it does get very Damocles sword-like when you get into that kind of stuff. So I asked you what you guys are working on, what's next, if you want to share that.
Yeah, for sure. So, our basic engine that we've created My team always has to pull me back because I'm like a, oh, look, a squirrel kind of guy where like I am always, pushing to the next application and things. And so we've really focused on compliance and going to market in the compliance space because that's so obvious and such a great starting point for us. I mean, when we think about what our platform can do, it can make sense of information in a lot of different domains. So um, another somewhat related, similar domain is procurement. So, companies have to evaluate all sorts of documentation, technical information, terms and conditions, blah, 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 et cetera, when they're trying to pick a vendor to work with. And so procurement teams have long lists of criteria that need to be satisfied in order to, work with a certain company. That's a perfect use case as well. We can load in procurement requirements instead of a compliance framework. And actually, a user can do that directly on their own and click a button and make sense of a whole bunch of vendor materials as well on different dimensions you might care about. So that's another use case. And anything that fits that basic format of big corpus of information to be studied, and then a clear set of, framework or criteria that you need to gauge all that information on. That's the perfect use case. So anything outside of
Yeah.
what I just described is there's tons of, ways to do to apply this.
Yeah, at the outset, you sort of described, I asked you about the trajectory, IO to AI to Vero. And you mentioned that your team is all psychologists. And I know that there is an element of psychology in all this to the extent that also you guys are all trained using data and all that. But are there any use cases that are a little bit closer to psychology, using it for changing behaviors or anything like this at the workplace?
Um, the application that is closer to psychology, at least closer to what I used to do, and we all at my company used to do, is, work in hiring. So, employee selection, where you have assessments and interviews and other sorts of tech tools designed to help companies figure out who are the likely best new hires. So, those processes we can direct our engine towards to evaluate them, not just on whether they're compliant, but whether they're effective
Right.
and generating positive results for the company and so forth. And so that's the idea of the whole coin flip thing, and being able to understand whether this is just a coin flip or whether it's actually driving value and results for the company. And the interesting thing there, Charles, is that so many tools in HR tech and really in every domain are marketed in a way that sounds amazing, but is oftentimes lacking in real outcome measurement and rigorous evaluation. A lot of times, so many times, I mean, and you can almost pick a website of any vendor, any company, HR tech or other, and go to their website and look at all the claims that are made, and then try to think about it as a scientist and think about, okay, based on what data did they make that claim? And you can't tell. You can almost never tell, right? And so, a lot of times it's very easy to say, "Oh, this process will help companies hire people faster." Okay, well, is faster? Does that matter? I mean, because what if I'm hiring people with a coin flip? That's pretty fast, but it's not necessarily good. So, you got to ask these questions. You got to learn to dig into marketing claims to really interrogate and understand these types of tools. And it's just,
Yeah.
scientific literacy as a society is not great, as you probably would, agree. And so the idea that we need to be better scientists and understand, I mean, we live in a world of noise and it's very hard to find the signal. And so you have to have critical faculties, I think, to do that. And that's, ultimately the way we want to use this platform is to help people do that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Another project, I wrote a piece for a client on this very topic, the scientific method. So many people don't have the skills, don't have the experience to discern, to make first of all, to read that kind of literature, to read specialized literature, to be able to understand when claims are well grounded, when they're not, et cetera. So I wrote this thing, and then after writing it, I'm like, this seems kind of rudimentary. I don't want to insult anybody, but the person who engaged me to do it said, no, this is people need it at this fundamental level because it's just something either they don't know about, they've never experienced, and they need this kind of remedial training on it. So it's kind of interesting. Eric, last question. We have this new segment we call Bag Check. What's in your bag? What are your go-to AI tools? So I'd
Okay.
like to ask you, what do you have? What are your go-to AI tools?
Well, gosh, there's so many, and what I try to do is just explore different ones too, because it's just important to stay up to date on.
How about this? Let me refine it a little bit. Your desert island AI tools.
Well, I use Perplexity a lot.
Uh-huh.
I've got new. So, for me, I like that because it cites its reasoning and its research, so you can
Right.
click on it and stuff like that. So I like that a lot. I use it as a glorified Google search. I don't use it per se to write things or anything like that. I still am a little old school. I'd rather write my own words and, figure out things in my own head that I'm putting out there in the world. But that's the main one that I use on a regular basis. I mean, we obviously use large language models in our systems. We use OpenAI's models by default. We can also use other ones like Llama if you prefer open source. So we're trying to be as flexible as possible. And for me, like, we're building logic on top of these models. So we're a bit agnostic about the actual underlying technology, and we'll just use whatever is the best, at a given point in time. So, there's this, it evolves so fast. I mean, there's a new thing called Mistral, a OCR, I think, that I just found out about recently, and that's a new like optical character recognition AI thing that maybe will be a little bit more advanced than other stuff before it. And so we're investigating that. And we're always looking at, the most cutting edge, newest technologies to sort of build into our tech stack so that, clients don't have to worry about that. We worry about that. So yeah, I don't know. It's an exciting time of growth in this area for sure.
Yeah, it really is. It does have that sort of I mean, I guess the easy analogy is the early days of the internet, but it's a little further downstream than that because this has come so fast
Yeah.
and it's so, I mean, everybody's initial encounter is like, this is magic.
Yeah. For sure. And I mean, there was a quote that I saw on LinkedIn from Ethan Mollick, the
Mhm.
professor at
The word
Wharton,
guy.
and he had a comment about how if large language model um, development stopped today, or all AI development stopped today, it would still be years before we work out all the applications of it. So there's so much that can be built and done with what we have right now that's
Yes.
being, utilized. And that's the space we're in. That's what we're building logic on top of these. And, Sequoia Capital has a piece from a few months ago where some of their investors talk about this idea of building logic and capability on top of large language models. And they talk about it as service as a software instead of software as a service. Or they also have this term called cognitive architecture that describes sort of, building these sorts of thought processes that are automated with large language models. And they say that that is a multi-trillion dollar total addressable market. That's a big number. And the reason they think it is so big is because it essentially represents the automation
Yeah.
of human intellectual labor. Increasingly high level thinking can be systematized and programmed with these types of approaches that we have today, not tomorrow, but are already here. So I think we're in a time of massive upheaval, massive disruption, and two things. One is, as an innovator, we're focused on figuring out ways to add value and use these technologies. But on a societal level, we also all need to be supportive of discussions and thinking about what comes next. What happens what does the world look like in 10, 20, 30 years for our children, for our grandchildren? What are they doing? Because this technology is here, it's not going away, and you really can't stop it at this point. And so I think we have a choice to wander into that aimlessly or decide that we're going to create a better world where people have more free time and support and can use technology to thrive. And so that is, I think, an important conversation that we need to have as, a collective.
For
And
sure. Let me ask you actually one last question occurs to me because it has come up with some regularity in the last, I don't know, handful of podcasts, which is to say, do guardrails stifle innovation? I don't think, in my view, they're mutually exclusive. In fact, they coexist very nicely. What's your view on that?
I totally agree. I think it's a, misconception that you have to deregulate in order to have innovation. I mean, every big advance we've had throughout history has eventually been regulated and successfully so. I mean, in most cases. So, I think I don't want there to be innovation in how to extract more efficiency from the workforce and treat them in a inhumane way. Like that's not something where I want there to be innovation. So I want there to be innovation in a way that helps humans and makes our lives better. That's where we need the innovation. So if somebody's innovating in a way that's negative or, I mean, we don't want that. So I would like to be stopped for the innovation to focus on things that can actually help us. I mean, yeah, I don't know why there's such, pushback on the general idea of regulation. I do think obviously there's like copyright issues and stuff like that when we
Right.
start to get large language models and all that. So I don't necessarily have the right answer for all that stuff.
Yeah, yeah. No, but again, it's a question that keeps on coming up, and it seems to me they're just, outside of the compliance world, just the idea of a guardrails or constraints. A lot of great art, a lot of great things have been achieved because of constraints or structure. If you don't have that structure, it's sometimes really hard to create or
Yeah.
innovate. So.
Mm.
But in any case, Eric, I really do appreciate this time. Really flew, man. Really
Yeah,
appreciate this.
yeah, absolutely. It's been fun. It's been great. Especially the guitar talk. That's always fun. So,
Oh, absolutely. In fact, when you finally perfect this art, this craft,
mhm, mhm.
I'm going to have you on, assuming it's not going to take you years and years and years.
No, it's not going to take years. It's going to take decades.
Oh
So
no.
be old when this happens. But
Oh my goodness. All
yeah,
right. Well, that's not encouraging news. Anyway, Eric, I really do appreciate you coming on. It's a lot of fun. Thanks very much.
appreciate it, Charles. Thanks a lot.
Today, I spoke with Eric Sydell, co-founder and CEO of Vero AI, a firm dedicated to helping companies understand AI and other algorithmic solutions. Eric joined me from the guitar shop that doubles as his office, or the office that doubles as a guitar shop. I'm not sure. We'll have to work that out. Anyway, this is Charles Epstein for the X Factor podcast. Thanks for listening.